Today, I, Dr. Ratika, along with me, Sir Dr. Suman, sir, we are going to talk to you about something very interesting, and that is understanding the lens of gender equality and gender equity. Okay, so, sir, may I begin the session?
Yes, yes, please, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll just share my. Yeah. Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
It's
Put in the
visible.
full slide mode.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So before I begin, I would just like all our participants to quickly write in the chat window, what do you mean by gender equity? If you could all write in the chat window, what do you mean by gender equity? There's no right or there's no wrong answer. Yes, Soumya, Rajat, Sagarjeet, if you could write. Okay, so Soumya writes equal opportunity to both the gender. Okay, okay. That's very interesting. Soumya, thank you. So basically, if we look at certain definitions, okay, regarding gender equality and gender equity, let us now focus on the definition of gender. So it refers to the economic, social, political, and cultural attributes and opportunities associated with being a male or a female. Okay. The social definition of what it means to be a woman or a man vary among cultures and changes over time. So we say that, like what it means to be a man in Thailand may be different from the definition of what it means to be a man in China. So gender definitely has a social connotation attached to it. Okay. But if you look at the definition of sex, it refers to the biological differences between males and females. Sex differences are concerned with males and females' physiology. Now, coming to two very basic terms, what is gender equity and gender equality? Now, like you said, gender equity is the process of being fair to women and men, including using measures to compensate for historical and social disadvantages that prevent men and women from operating on a level playing field. So this equity approach, or we call the gender equity approach, it arose in the 1970s and sought to increase women's active participation in the development process. And in the 1970s, the laws had had been changed in many countries to grant women equal legal status as men. However, many women found that legal equality does not guarantee equal benefits. So the equity approach was sought to basically address this gap. So if you see, gender equality is the state or condition that affords women and men equal enjoyment of human rights, socially valued goods, opportunities, and resources. So there's a difference between gender equity and gender equality. That's absolutely right, Sagarjeet. It's equation between men and women, like equal plans and programs provide to both. Very rightly said. Now, if you see where does gender lies in the Sustainable Development Goals, so it basically caters to the goal 5 of the gender of the Sustainable Development Goals. You all know about the SDGs. And for gender equality, it is very important that education is the actually the basic essential tool for achieving the goals of equality, development, and peace. It is useful tool for addressing the religious and cultural impediments that deny girls access to education. So basically, literacy in women is important for improving health, nutrition, and education in the family and empowering women to participate in the decision making process in the society. And it is the traditional practices that affects girls negatively are very noticeably in the education sector. Now let us see how. If you look at the Gender Equity India report, 1 in 3 of the world's child brides they live in India. Child brides include girls under 18 who are already married, as well as women of all ages who first married in childhood. That's a definition of child brides. And 1 in 3 of the world's child brides, they actually live in India. Child marriage has declined in India, but across the country, 1 in 5 girls and nearly 1 in 6 boys are still married as children below India's legal age of marriage. There are certain things we need to think about. If you look at the rural versus urban divide, child marriage is more prevalent in rural areas compared to urban areas. And UNICEF data, it suggests that over half of India's child brides, they reside in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Maharashtra, and Madhya Pradesh. Now, talking about child marriage, what are the causes? Of course, poverty is a very major cause because families living in poverty sometimes marry off their daughters to reduce financial burdens. Patriarchy and gender norms, because the deep-rooted patriarchal beliefs, they devalue girls, seeing them as economic burdens. Child marriage is used to control female sexuality and ensure their role as wives and mothers. Of course, there is lack of education. Girls with limited education are more likely to be married early as their options are perceived as limited. Of course, there is limited protection, insufficient enforcement of laws prohibiting child marriage, and inadequate support system for girls at risk contribute to the problem. Moving forward, if you see, child brides, they face challenges in continuing their education, of course. Fewer than 2 in 10 married girls, they remain in school. 1 in 3 girls face a heightened risk of violence and poverty. In terms of demographics, 48% of girls who were married below 18 years of age had received no education as compared to only 4% who gained higher education. So, child marriage is a human rights violation and a recognized form of gender and sexual based violence. And India's success in reaching zero child marriage is critical to obtaining the UN SDG goal, which is target 5.3. And of course, legal measures alone are not going to be sufficient. Holistic socio-economic solutions must be implemented to facilitate, raise awareness, and improve access to education. Now, if you see the India current stand of India, the female literacy rate in India has steadily improved. It has reached 65.46% in 2011, up from 8.86%. However, a significant gender gap still exists compared to the male literacy rate. If you look at the GFR, the GER, which is a gross enrollment ratio, if you see at the primary level, the GER for girls at the primary level is higher than for boys, indicating gender parity in school. But if you look at secondary level, the GER for girls dropped compared to boys, highlighting a greater dropout rate for females at higher school levels. So something we need to think about. And higher education, female GER in higher education has seen some improvement. In 2021 to 2022, it was 27.9%, slightly higher than the male GER, suggesting positive changes in the women's access to higher education. But again, what is happening at the secondary level is something we need to think. If you look at technical education in engineering courses, 10.69 lakh women students were enrolled at the undergraduate level compared to 26.17 lakh men in 2022-2021. In law courses, again, you saw less women students were enrolled as compared to male counterparts. In IT and computers, of course, again, there was less, and the number of women students pursuing management courses at the postgraduate level increased in 2020-21. It was still lower than the number of male students enrolled in the discipline. So, what are the factors that are affecting female participation? This is something we need to think about. Of course, it is poverty, because economic constraints often causes families to prioritize sons' education over daughters. Of course, there are social norms where traditional gender roles and expectations around marriage and domestic responsibility often limit a girl's education. Of course, there are safety concerns. Fear of harassment or violence on the way to school or in campus discourages female enrollment. Lack of facilities, insufficient sanitation facilities in schools, particularly for girls, can deter their attendance. If you look at the positive trends, Programs like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao save the daughter, educate the daughter, promote girls' education, and fight against these social barriers. Greater awareness of the importance of female education is leading to shifts in attitudes and increased enrollment. And successful women in various fields inspire girls to pursue education and break these traditional barriers. If you look at the women participation in the workforce, as per the latest available annual PLFS reports, the estimated labor force participation rate on usual status for women aged 15 years and above in the country showed an increasing trend. It was 30% during 2019 and 2020, which increased to 32.5%, and then, and now it stands at 37%. Again, we're talking about the labor force participation rate. However, if you see the employability, there is still a major gap. If you see the employability between men versus women, look at the participation at work from 2017 to 2023. You will find a gap where 67% male participation was seen as compared to 33% of women participation or employability. Now, there are many reasons why women in India drop out of the workforce. Of course, there are social and cultural norms, traditional gender roles, which means deep-rooted societal expectations, often prioritizes women's roles as wives, mothers, and homemakers. This leads to pressure to leave jobs after marriage or childbirth. Family expectations and domestic work. Families may discourage women from working, prioritizing maintaining family reputation and perceived safety for women. Again, if you look at the workplace, there are a lot of obstacles, lack of opportunities. Women may face fewer job opportunities in certain sectors and limited access to high paying skilled positions. Again, there is a case of gender pay gap. This is gender discrimination. The gender pay gap persists, causing women to earn less for the same work, discouraging their workforce participation. Concerns over safety, harassment, and a lack of supportive work environments contribute to women choosing to leave the workforce. A simple thing, a bathroom for women is scarce in our country. Like I said, safety concerns again, educational factors, disparities in access to education and higher education limit women's qualifications for well paying jobs, increasing their likelihood for dropping out of the workforce. There may be a lack of opportunities to develop skills aligned with the modern job market, hindering women's ability to secure and retain jobs. Of course, there are a lot of other factors like migration. Some women have to discontinue employment because they migrate after marriage. And of course, a very important concerning issue today is lack of support systems. Inadequate access to childcare, elder care services, and other support structure places additional burden on women, leading them to leave their jobs. Okay, so this was all from my side on giving a basic understanding of gender equity and equality. I would now request Sir Dr. Suman sir to take up on the strategies for moving the needle on gender equity.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Kindly, yes, okay, okay. Just I'll share. So, thank you so much. Have given the insight about the gender equity regarding the concepts, definitions, hindrances, and all these things. So we'll discuss about six strategies, particularly how to address the gender equity in your organizational perspective or also in the Indian perspective. We'll discuss about various policies, programs already implemented by the government of India, and also some other things needs to be done regarding this gender equity. So in this presentations, the six needles we are talking about, first is we'll talking about the culture and strategy. Then we'll talk about the governance structure. Then third, we'll talk about the HR processes. And fourth is growth and inclusion criteria, particularly in the terms of economic and also gender pay equity. Then parenting and also the parenting and also the work-life balance. So the first strategy is the culture and strategy, as Madam discussed in the previous slides. So in India, particularly heterogeneity of the culture and tradition. So the culture and customs in India practices play a big role in keeping particularly women at lower places in the society, in our society. So this culture and practices particularly affects the variation in gender related behaviors between individuals within a cultural group as well as variation between cultures in both in the interculture and the intraculture activity. So it has been extremely in India is a very extremely patriarchal society. So this is patriarchal society contribute to the fundamental inequality between men and women. In the presumption that women sometimes consider part of the household belongs to only the father or husband or male members. So they are unable to get any say in matters related to the or either their own development or sometimes there are the community in the large. So if you look into the data, how our society is particularly the women's unpaid worker on women's unpaid work leads to gender-based violence in India. If you look the harshly criticized, sometimes women are harshly criticized and also sometimes the beaten. If you look into this is the NFSS data analyzed by the Care India. So the disobey men in the family. Suppose you are disobeying the family, the main members in your family, they either the harshly criticize is 42 percentage or either they beaten by the 24%. This is the huge amount of the gender violence. Spend money without asking, you have no rights, you have no freedom of the particularly expending your money. So you need to ask your male members in a family to spend your money. Then if you spend the money without asking, then 42% they are harshly criticized by their male members, although 26% 0.3% they are beaten by the male members. If you look into the fail to the care for children, sometimes women say they are engaged in many activities, they fail to care for children. They harshly criticized by 53 percentage and also 33% they are beaten by the male members. So leave here dependent on adult unattended. Suppose they thought ki only female members they will take care of the elderly members or the adults. The if will not attended, then the 60% they are abused and 36% by the beaten. If you look into the fail to prepare the meal, many members, male members, they are think the only cooking is the only the rights of the female. So we ask differently at the household levels. If you fail to prepare the meal for the men in the family members, definitely 67% they are harshly abused and 41% they are beaten, particular physical abuse. So if you face the water, firewood from the family, you will did not collect the firewood and others from the no, for the family, the 64% they are already higher, particularly harshly criticized and 42% are beaten. If if you look this data on this particularly the live household without permissions, if you don't have any rights, you have to ask your male members to go to the outside. If you go to the outside, the 86% they are harshly criticized and 54% you look into the data, 54% they are beaten. So this is the culture, this is the particular the concepts that was going on around the gender. So it needs the we needs to a strategic plan, particularly with innovative actions, how to support particular diversity at all levels, particularly in the both rural, urban, semi-urban. So everywhere you needs to address the issues. The second aspect we talk about the governance. If you look into this governance aspect, is it requires the diversity. Yes, a diversity along with that also the inclusion. Inclusion within the workforce. In sometimes we different. This is the male, this is the female, and the workforce. So it needs the diversification, diversity, and inclusiveness in respective to the gender. So we need to support the women managerial role, sometimes the leadership role. You have to support for this, promote the leadership. If you look in the Indian context, the first time government introduced the gender budgeting after lots of civil society interventions and all, they try to sometimes they try to try to finalize the gender budgeting part, particular to address the women gender issues in the budget. It uses budget as an entry point, particularly to apply a gender lens in the entire policy process. So gender budgeting is concerned with the gender sensitive formulation of in both in the legislations, initial stage, policy also, plan, programs and schemes, allocation and collection of resources, implementation and execution, and the monitoring, review, audit, impact assessment, and the follow of the corrective actions to address the gender disparity. So if you look into this budget system and budget, even by allocation of the money, now the government of India adopted the gender budgeting as a tool in it started 2004 and 5. So all the central government ministries, even if the various state governments, they are also the introducing this is gender budgeting their systems. So we have many laws from this after the independence. We have many laws, particularly the gender equity. So government of India has already enacted a number of legislation to prevent exploitation, harassment of women, and to address the issues of discrimination and gender disparities. So few acts I have also mentioned here: the right of children to free and compulsory educations, the Criminal Law Act, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, dowry provisions, indecent representation of Women Act, harassment, sexual harassment of women at a workplace act, Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, Equal Remuneration Act, Maternity Benefit Act, and the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment. This has given the tremendous inputs to the gender equity, particularly in the political process. They mandated 33% reservation for the women in the local governance. Now also the government is planning to give 33% reservation at the state legislature and the national legislatures. So the criminal law also amendment act 2013 has been enacted, making punishment more stringent for offense like rape, sexual assault. So we have lots of policies on that. So there are lots of schemes. Ma'am has already explained many schemes like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao schemes, Nirbhaya Fund particularly initiated to provide funds, Mahila Shakti Kendra, Adolescent Girls Scheme, then Griha Scheme, then Rashtriya Mahila Course, then Working Women Hostels, One Stop Center for the harassment, universalization of women helplines, Mahila Police Volunteers. All these programs are already implemented through the government of India regarding particular to manage the gender inequities. So the third critical aspect is HR process. HR process means how the pay scale equity for equivalent position within the organ. Many private organ in the government also, government and the private organizations, so they are discriminated they are discriminated their employees in terms of their gender issues. So the pay scale equity for equivalent positions within the organization required to particularly maintain the parity. So to encourage the employment of the women and several several news has been incorporated in various labor laws to create a congenial work environment for women workers. Many issues they have already addressed, like the child care centers at the workplace, time off for feeding childrens. They are providing the female employees, particularly feeding their children. Enhancement in paid maternity leave for 12 weeks to 26 weeks. The provision for mandatory creche facilities in the establishment or having 52 or more employees, so permitting women workers in the night shift with adequate safety measures. So the sexual harassment of women at the workplace. So all this they have already put forth in our legislation or the law and enactment. So in the growth and inclusion, if you look into the economic terms, in the current scenario, according to WPR data, 26% of the women in urban area and only 17% in the rural area, they are engaged in various economic activities in our country. So if you look into this involvement in the economic activities, lots of people you see 70% and 70% rural area is almost आपको 80% their population is left out. How you will develop as a economic as economically grown up countries, जो particularly ignoring the 80% and 7% of the more than 80% of the populations. So for the any growth of the countries, it requires the inclusiveness to the gender. So you have to provide the economic opportunities for the women to particular the women to come into the streamline. So always in the notion, the all services and opportunities and establishment, all people that have made female, particularly the female stereotypes, do not define societal roles and expectations. So growth should be truly inclusive and gender inequitable. So the pattern of growth must create decent work and productive employment opportunity for men and women. So if you look into the recent data of this, the US recently conducted one of the study, they adjusted 10% gender equity within their particular the data set. So they found that if you will adjust in the 10% of the equity data set, you will see the 160% of the particular giving the revenue in terms of the revenue. So the gender gap, gender equity, it should be managed within the system. So in our context also, the economic, if you look into the economic growth is not a silo. So the economic growth is a particularly the gender process and the gender structures, entire gender structures, male, female, various particular the racial. So everywhere you have to manage. The economy comprises it's both a paid economy and the non-paid economy, whereas output is counted as the contributing to economic growth as measured by the GDP. So unpaid economy, many peoples, most of the peoples are unpaid economy. In people are reproduced on a daily and on intergenerational basis through unpaid care work and domestic work. This is not counted in our economy. So unpaid domestic work such as collecting firewoods, water, house cooking, and house activities, all are going vegetables in the kitchen gardens, and the such outputs works are not measured and not counted as part of the national output as in terms of the our GDP. So unpaid care work is not conceptually included in the system of the national accounts as per the GDP, and it is not counted as contributing to the economic growth. So it clearly marks an indirect and unmeasured contribution. So since without this work, there should be no people to produce economic growth. So you need to particularly see in the growth of for the gender equity and needs to provide the opportunities of the populations. So another thing you will talk about the gender pay equity. This is the major issues in our India, all the developed countries and also the developing countries, including India. So the pay equity means it is the concept of compensating employees who have similar job functions with comparable equal pay regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, and other status. So you have to give the equal pay for the equal rank. So gender pay gap differs widely, particularly in the race and ethnicity in the rural area, in the terms of tribal population, non-tribal populations, various regions, also geographical regions. So there's a huge gap between the gender gap first. So the pay gap increases with also the age. So according to the estimation of the World Inequality Report 22, in India, men earns 82% of the labor income, whereas women only earns 80%. There is a huge the gap. So there is also gender pay gap in 28% to 30% of the women climb up in the corporate ladder. In the IT sector, in the corporate ladder, when you go into the 28 to 30%, there is a difference in the gender pay equity. So if you look into this recent data published in research papers, if you look into the agriculture sector, so average daily wages is 383 for the men and the women is 294. If you look into the state-wise data, Tamil Nadu has the highest the wage gap in the male female, then Goa, Kerala, Chhattisgarh, and Telangana. They have the huge gap in the agriculture sector also, because most of the people are depending on our agriculture. So salaried class is if you service sector, the man is average man salary is 20,636, and another is 15. The woman is 15,722. So the maximum, if you look into the state-wise data, the maximum your gap is in Gujarat, then West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Assam, and also the Punjab. If you look into the corporate sectors, if the employees 0.97% difference, workers 0.97%, in the managerial, particularly the key manager positions, the huge, particularly 0.52%, almost 52% there is a difference, and in the board, in the various boards, that is 64% different in the pay scales. So in the last and the last not least, the particularly needle of this gender equity is parenting and work-life balance. So every country needs to provide the opportunities. Every both in the private sector, in the government sector, every they should give the opportunities, particularly to maintain the gender equity in terms of the parenting and work-life balance. So there is should be the flexibility and the hybrid mode we learned in the during the COVID period, or the work from home, or we can also provide the paid leave, or you can also the coaching program for new parenting, how they will look into their parents. So you have provide the support, social support for the greater cause of this humanity. So this is all about the six needles of the key strategy of the gender equity. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer on that. Any questions from any participants? I think they don't have any questions. So, ma'am, please.
Yes, sir. So, yes, I think so. Yes, Rashmi, you've unmuted yourself. Yes, do you have a question, Rashmi? Okay, I think none of you, Rajat, has any question. Okay, since you don't have any questions, so I think we can then close the meeting. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you had a greater insight into gender equity lens. Okay, sir, I think we can then close the meeting.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So nice.
Thank you, everyone.